If you're building, remodeling, or changing out your water heater, this video is for you. We're going to be talking about what's new in 2024 with heat pump water heater technology. We're going to talk about some of the features and benefits, what the costs are, what the savings might look like. You may not know, but there's actually 3 different types of heat pump water heaters, so we're going to review that, as well as talk about some considerations like space and condensate. We're also going to get into some myths, some common misunderstandings about heat pump water heaters. And lastly, we're going to talk about rebates and what the actual cost for these units look like. Today's build show is sponsored by the Environmental Protection Agency's Energy Star. Let's get going. Okay, are you ready? So first off, let's start on technology here. Now first, heat pump water heaters. This is actually not a very new technology. These have been in the market since 2008. I put one of the very first ones in a client's house that had an electric resistance tank, and I was blown away at the energy guide savings of this unit. Basically uses 2 old technologies, resistance electric, and pretty much all these have that built in, but it also has a heat pump. Your refrigerator in your kitchen is the same type of heat pump technology where it's taking the heat out of the refrigerator and moving that heat to the outside. You feel cold in that refrigerator, but in fact, the heat pump just moved the heat. Now the hairdryer is basically 100% efficient, but these heat pump water heaters, on the other hand, are almost 4 times more efficient. In fact, some of these models are even more than 4 times efficient because just like your refrigerator, it's not making heat, it's moving heat, and that's the beauty of the heat pump water heater. And they're going to put water in that tank that's between 120, some of these units go all the way up to 150 degrees. So you're making the same amount of hot water, but you're going to spend less money getting there. Now, while we're talking about this tech, I want to also mention gas water heaters. Now, some of these newer models, believe it or not, could be replacing a gas water heater. When these first came out, we only thought of these as replacement for electric resistance tanks. But these days, you're going to see a little bit later in the video, a bunch of these models could easily replace your gas tank. Now let's talk about the efficiency of these models. Now the Department of Energy has these things called a UEF, the Uniform Energy Factor. And if you look at the label on each one of these tanks, they have an energy guide. On that energy guide, it's going to say with this criteria that all manufacturers are labeling under, here's how much annual electricity you're going to use. Now of course, this is just an average. This is just a value to try and keep all the manufacturers on the same playing field. Your actual use is going to vary greatly. And for instance, my water down here in Texas, when it comes in from the street, is quite a bit hotter than your water if you're watching this in Minnesota. So my heat pump water heater down here is going to work even more efficiently because the water is not as cold coming in. And in fact, I actually might use less money than what that energy guide says. So this is all going to vary. The other big variable is how many people are in your house, right? So if you're watching this and you're like me, I have 4 kids at home, I use a lot of water. My 80-gallon heat pump water heater probably runs a lot more than yours if you only have 2 people in your house, let's say. So with that being said, I do want to mention that this energy guide is a great way to get a good gauge on what the annual energy use is going to be. Now I printed this out from the web. I don't have this tank with me, but if you go online and search for the least cost electric water heater on the marketplace, you're going to find something like a 40 or 50 gallon electric resistance tank. It's going to run like $500-600, something like that. And this is the energy guide off of one of those that I printed. Almost $500 a year in energy costs. And if you break that down, we're talking about just shy of $42 per month in electricity. That's a fair amount of money. On the other hand, if you look at this field of these 7 tanks that I've got behind me here, each one of these is a heat pump water heater, and I broke it down, and if you look here, we're talking about less than half, sometimes a quarter of this energy use on each one of these tanks on an annual basis. That's a really big deal. So already you can see, look, if I spend more money on a heat pump water heater, I'm going to make that back every single month by having a much lower electric bill. Now, one thing you need to know about these heat pump water heaters though is when they're running, they're actually going to make the space around the water heater a little bit cooler, and they have a condensate drain, which means they're going to act like a little mini dehumidifier. What's happening is each one of these units here, with the exception of one, has the heat pump on top, and these heat pumps are bigger than your refrigerator heat pump. They're going to range anywhere from maybe a half to as much as 1 ton of refrigerator size, or of heat pump size, I should say. So when they're running, they're going to make a little bit of noise. There's going to be a fan in here, and they're going to take that air that's around the tank and move the heat from the air and put it into the tank. Now, when that happens, there's going to be a benefit, in my mind, of a little bit of cool air exhausting from these units, and it's also going to make some condensate. And you're going to notice a lot of these units have condensate drains, like this one right here on this A.O. Smith, and that's also going to act as a little bit of a mini dehumidifier when that actual unit is running. So there's a bit of a myth around that though. Let's jump into that right now. Some people would say, or I've heard people say that, oh, you don't want to use one of those because it's going to make your place too cold in the wintertime. Is that really true? I looked at a couple studies out there, and one of the studies in particular, I'll put a link to it in the description below, showed that if this was operating in a basement, let's say in a cold climate, that'd be a perfect place for one of these. If you're in Maine, if you're in Minnesota, you might operate this in your basement, in your mechanical room. It will make that space a little bit colder, but not by very much. At your feet or at the floor level, it might drop the temperature by 3 or 4 degrees around the tank and the general area of the tank. But at your chest or kind of eye level, you're only talking about maybe 2 degrees colder in that space. On the other hand, for me in Texas, I really like having this inside the envelope of the house. In fact, I'm designing a new house right now with a client, and I'm putting it right in the laundry room space, so I'll get that benefit of cool air in the laundry room. And laundry rooms tend to be a little bit more humid, so I'll get just a little bit of dehumidification out of this unit. That's really a big deal, and that's helpful for me at least 10 or 11 months of the year in Texas when it's warm out. Okay, next up, let's talk about the 3 different types of heat pump water heaters. This might be a little bit new for you, so hang on with me here. Now, most electric resistance tanks run on 240 volts, and if you look at these 3 models right here from LG, American Standard, and Bradford White, these are 240 volt models. So if you had an electric resistance water heater, you would simply replace it with one of these models, because a resistance model is going to run on 240, 220, 240, 221, whatever it takes.
Yeah, you're going to make it all 220?
Yeah, 220, 221, whatever it takes.
Now the second category though is these 3 models right here. Rheem, A.O. Smith, and GE all make 120 volt models. So for instance, check this out. The plug that's already wired on this looks like your regular old plug, just like you're plugging your countertop coffee maker in. No need to wire this to 120, and the reason why is these units would be a direct replacement for a gas water heater. So if you have a 40-gallon gas water heater that's been there for 10 years and all of a sudden needs replaced, all 3 of these models would be an easy direct replacement. Plug it into an outlet that's already existing. They could be on a dedicated circuit. Some of the manufacturers say they can even be on a shared circuit, which means you could just plug this into any old plug that might be in your garage. And believe it or not, these would make the same capacity as what you had before with a gas unit, and now that's with electric. The reason why the EPA cares about this is because we've got more and more sources of electricity in the US going to renewables. Where I am in Texas, we've got a lot of wind and we've got a lot of solar, and a lot of my clients are getting prepared to eventually potentially unplug from the grid. They're doing battery storage in their houses, they're putting solar on. So now, why wouldn't I use that solar electricity that I'm making to heat the water and not have a gas line into my house? This is good for everybody involved, but ultimately it's really good for your wallet. The only unit that's a split model, this is Senko. I think I've been mispronouncing it as SanCO2, but this is what they call a split unit, where you've got a tank inside and then you've got a unit that's making the hot water outside. So this looks like a standard compressor like you might have on your air conditioning system. It's outside, and what connects these two is some 1/2-inch PEX. Now this may not be the right unit for you if you're replacing an existing tank. If you're building new or remodeling, this could be a great choice, because then you can do the infrastructure changes that you needed by putting that water line from the outside to the inside. The other cool thing about this unit is, because it's so small and the compressor is not here, I could shove this under a staircase or some tiny little closet, close a door, and there's no air requirements. Which leads me to the next thing that I want to talk about, which is requirements here. Every other unit besides the split unit, the heat pump is on the top. In fact, this unit kind of looks a little bit like R2-D2, doesn't it? It's got this smaller unit up top here, and this is actually what's making that hot water. It's putting the heat from the air into the water, which means that these all need to be in a space where it's got some air available. If you've got a garage, if you're in the south, this is a great option. If you've got a big basement with a big mechanical room in the north, this is a good option. However, if you have a gas water heater that's been in an enclosed closet, you got to be cautious. You can't just pop this unit into that closet. It needs that airflow, so you might need to add, let's say, a louver door for that. You might want to add a bath fan that's able to move that air through that closet with a louver door and maybe dump that output air into a closet or into your kitchen or into your laundry room, somewhere that you'd actually benefit from getting 1 or 2 degrees colder in that space. So look up the manufacturer's requirements for air and for closet size. In general, they're going to look for maybe a space that's a 10 by 10 type space or a little bit larger. And like I said, though, you can circumvent that if you've got a louver door or some other options. Okay, so one of the things on space requirements I wanted to mention was several of these units, the manufacturers make ducting kits, so you could actually pull air from a room next door and dump air to a room adjacent. They're never going to move that from a house to a garage door or from a house to the outside. It's always going to keep that air within your envelope. So just keep that in mind. If it was in a garage, you might have a garage closet and it might move air between the garage and that closet, or if it was inside your house from a laundry room or a mechanical room or a secondary space to the room next door, that can be a great option. Now, the other thing you need to remember about these units, especially if you're changing from a atmospherically vented gas unit, is you're going to have a condensate drain. You need some place to dump that water. Remember I mentioned this one's got the hose pre-installed. This is going to make a little bit of water when it runs. Now, it's not going to be acidic water, it's going to be a neutral water, but you need a place for that to dump. So your plumber might install a condensate pump where it could get pumped up and put to a drain somewhere. You might have a floor drain if it's in a basement, or like I said earlier, if you're remodeling or building new, just to make sure that you've got a drain in the plans so that you can plan for that ahead of time. And lastly, to wrap up this space requirement, check out each manufacturer's, because some manufacturer will tell you they need 700 cubic feet of volume. Others have actually gone down to like 400 some feet of volume needed for these. So you may be surprised that even a smallish room is enough requirement when it comes to cubic feet of air for these to operate properly. Next up, let's talk sizing. Almost all these heat pump manufacturers make them in various sizes. And here's my general advice. First off, the manufacturer is going to have some advice on their website for what you're doing. But if you've got a gas tank and you're moving to a 240 volt heat pump model, typically you're going to size up one model. So if you've got a 50-gallon gas tank and you're going to a 240 heat pump, I would consider going up to, let's say, a 65-gallon. On the other hand, if you've got a 120 model, meaning one of these that just plugs into a standard wall outlet, and you had a gas tank that it's replacing, you probably want to size up 2. The reason being that these are going to make hot water a little bit slower, frankly. So having that standing 80 gallons, let's say, of hot water means I've got plenty of capacity for all those showers. The other thing to remember is these are going to allow you to set a different temperature on the output, and several of these have thermostatic valves built in, which means, for instance, some of these go up to 140 or even 150 degrees in the tank, so they've got lots of hot water in that tank, and that's actually too hot to output. You wouldn't want water coming out of your tap at 150, it would scald you. So these mixing valves that come with most of these units are going to mix that down to, let's say, 120 or maybe 125 degrees. So these are going to have plenty of capacity, but you may need to size up compared to what you've had in the past, because the first hour rating is what you're going to want to look at for that. And again, you've got that additional capacity even if you're not sure, because you can move the temperature up. And by the way, as a example back to my house, my 80-gallon tank is set at 125 degrees, and my unit actually goes up to 150. I never have needed to turn it up because I've never run out of hot. But if I did start running out of hot, let's say I had a bunch of company coming over, I could actually turn that tank temperature up on my model. So that's something you can always do in the future. Okay, next let's talk maintenance. Any tank, no matter the fuel source, is going to have an anode rod in that tank, and it's going to potentially have some sediment in the bottom of the tank. So you want to clean those or replace those on a regular basis. But one thing that's different about a heat pump water heater is this right here. Each one of these models is going to have a cleanable filter that simply you take this out and rinse it out to clean it. It's really simple, and depending on your location, it may get dirtier. The model that I have in my in-laws house has a filter just like this. It's in the garage. Every time I've cleaned it, it's hardly had anything on it. On the other hand, if this is in a laundry room, there might be some of that lint in the air from your dryer. It might need to be cleaned more regular. That's really the only regular maintenance that these need. Okay, next let's talk settings. There's going to be 4 main settings on these units. There's going to be an electric only mode. I would not recommend using that. That's just going to use resistance electric. That's not going to be very efficient. The next mode is going to be hybrid mode, which gives you the option, or gives the unit the option, to either use the heat pump or the electric resistance, but it's going to favor the heat pump. The next one is heat pump only, and that's actually where I'd recommend you set these units, at least when you get them. Put it to heat pump only. That's going to be your most efficient way of making hot water. If that gives you enough hot water for your family, that's perfect, because that's the most efficient way that this unit is going to make hot water. That's going to give you the lowest possible energy bill. And then lastly is going to be vacation mode. So if you're going to be gone, or if this is a unit that's going into a vacation house, put that on vacation mode when you're going to be gone. That way it's not making any hot water. It's just keeping that tank to like 50 or 60 degrees so that it's going to not freeze if you had some really bad weather. Let's talk about a misconception that heat pump water heaters are loud. Now, when these units are running, they're all going to have somewhat of a low hum. You're going to be able to hear it if you're within this proximity of that unit. But in general, most of today's units that have an Energy Star logo are going to be between 45 and 55 decibels when they're running. Pretty similar to a modern dishwasher when it's running. And the other thing to notice is that over the last few years, manufacturers have really focused on that quietness level, and most of them have dropped significantly. In fact, as much as maybe 10 decibels from some manufacturers. And that's a big deal. 10 decibels represents a 50% reduction in sound. So almost all these units, as long as you're not right next to them, if you're in a room next door, you're really not going to hear it. They're not loud. And remember, with the UEFs on these units being between 3.5 or maybe even over 4, that means they're going to be 4 times more efficient than even the most efficient gas tankless water heater on the market, which means that every one of these units is probably going to be less expensive for you to operate in terms of dollars out of your pocket on a monthly basis than really any gas water heater in the market today. And lastly, the other thing I want to mention here was that they're super simple to install. That is a little bit of a myth. You do want an installer that knows what they're talking about, and you really want to read the directions. Because as we talked about earlier, the space requirements, the type of install, the electrical requirements, this isn't really a do-it-yourself project unless you're a builder for a living like I am. You really want to get a plumber out there who knows what they're doing and has installed these before to make sure they get installed correctly. Another thing I want to mention here is if you're a builder who's building new construction and you utilize the HERS scores, by going to one of these units, these heat pumps, compared to a standard electric resistance, you're going to save anywhere from 2 to maybe 6 points on your HERS score. You're going to bring that down. So that's a really big deal. Okay guys, let's close out the video. I think I've made a pretty good case for these being crazy efficient and a very good choice. However, I did say earlier, they tend to be more expensive than a standard electric or a standard gas. But the good news is there's some money available for you to bring those down. So first off, utility rebates. There's rebates around all over the place. For instance, for me in Austin, Texas, my local utility, Austin Energy, would give me $800 right off the top if I bought one of these units. So that's a big deal. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention, by the way, those are going to be available for you across the US, and I'll put a link in the description so you can find your local utility rebates. But for anybody in the United States, as of January 1, 2023, the Inflation Reduction Act is going to give you a 30% tax credit on not only the unit itself, but the install cost as well, up to $2,000. Okay, y'all, I think we made a pretty good case here that these heat pump water heaters, no matter which manufacturer you go with, they are crazy efficient. And if you look at the energy guides on here, you're gonna see that on day one, you're gonna save money on your utilities compared to a standard gas or a standard electric resistance model. Not only on the unit itself, but also on the installation costs. So both your unit that you're buying and the plumber to install it, a 30% rebate up to $2,000. So between those two, you can save some serious dollars. In my book, you might end up spending less money on one of these from day one, but if you factor in the savings, even if you don't have as big a rebate as I do, let's say in Austin, it's not going to take you long. Most of these units within 2 or 3 years, when you factor in the utility costs, you're going to seriously make that up, and from there on in, it's going to be paying you. This is a really good deal. You definitely want to jump in. Big thanks to the EPA's Energy Star program for sponsoring this video. As I said earlier, I put the first heat pump water heater available to me, which was around 2009, available here in Texas, and I've put them in ever since. I've loved seeing the manufacturers come out with newer and better and quieter and more efficient models. This is really a golden age for heat pump water heaters, and every one of these units would be a great choice for your house. If you're not currently a subscriber, guys, hit that subscribe button below. We've got new content here every Tuesday and every Friday. Follow us on TikTok or Instagram. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on The Build Show.